on the edge of the galaxy, where the stars thin and the void stretches endlessly, a lone explorer named Kale drifts silently through the darkness. His ship, battered and barely holding together, hums faintly as it descends toward the sleeping planet, a world whispered about in legends, its surface hidden beneath a veil of shimmering light. Stories speak of its power, of a secret buried deep within its core that promises eternal peace, but no one has ever returned to confirm the tales. Kale's fuel gauge flickers dangerously low, his time running out as he guides the ship through the planet's glowing atmosphere. Below him, the ground pulses faintly, as if alive, a rhythm that matches the unease growing in his chest. As the ship touches down, the air shifts. It's warm, almost inviting, but carries a strange hum, a vibration that seems to resonate deep within him. Kale steps onto the surface, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, luminescent ground. The planet feels alive, its energy wrapping around him like a whisper, pulling him forward. He can't explain it, but something here feels familiar, as if the planet has been waiting for him. Yet, with every step, the weight of his mission grows heavier. The air thickens, and the faint glow of the ground seems to pulse faster, brighter. Kale's heart races as he realizes he's not alone. Shadows shift at the edges of his vision, and a low, distant murmur rises around him, voices, ancient and deep, stirring from their slumber. The sleeping planet is waking, and Kale is about to discover why no one has ever returned. Kale stepped forward cautiously, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, shifting ground. The planet's surface was unlike anything he had ever seen. Around him, towering plants glowed with an ethereal light, their leaves shimmering in hues of blue and green, casting an otherworldly glow across the landscape. It was as if the flora itself was alive, breathing in tandem with the planet's heartbeat. Scattered among the glowing plants were crystalline structures, their surfaces smooth and translucent, yet they pulsed faintly, like the slow rhythm of a distant drum. Kale reached out to touch one, and for a moment, he swore he felt a warmth radiating from within, as if the crystal was alive. The air around him was thick with an almost imperceptible hum, a sound so faint it could have been mistaken for the wind. But as Kale paused to listen, he realized it wasn't wind at all. It was whispers, faint, melodic, and impossible to ignore. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, weaving through the glowing plants and crystalline structures, calling to him. His curiosity burned brighter with every step, but so did the unease creeping into his chest. The planet felt alive, watching, waiting. It was as if the very ground beneath him shifted with purpose, guiding him forward. Pushing aside his growing apprehension, Kale decided to follow the whispers. They seemed to beckon him deeper, toward the heart of the planet. Legends spoke of a core, a place where the planet's power was said to reside, a source of unimaginable energy and mystery. The whispers grew louder as he walked, their melody becoming more distinct, almost like a song. Yet with every step, the shadows at the edge of his vision seemed to stir. Shapes flitted in the distance, too fast to make out, always just out of reach. Kale's pulse quickened. Were they real, or was the planet playing tricks on his mind? The further he ventured, the more the planet seemed to test him. The ground shifted more noticeably now, as if resisting his presence. The whispers grew urgent, their tone shifting from melodic to insistent. Kale couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that the planet was offering him a chance to uncover its secrets, but only if he could prove himself worthy. The shadows continued to dart at the edges of his vision, and though he couldn't see them clearly, he could feel their presence, watching, waiting. The planet was alive, and it was watching him. Kale tightened his grip on his gear and pressed forward, determined to reach the core before the planet's patience, or his own, ran out. Kale's steps slowed as the forest around him began to change. The air grew heavier, charged with an energy that seemed to hum beneath his skin. Ahead, a massive tree loomed, its trunk so wide it could have housed an entire village. But what truly caught his breath were its roots, thick, sprawling tendrils that pulsed faintly with a soft, golden light, like veins of liquid fire running through the earth. The glow was hypnotic, drawing him closer until he stood at the base of the ancient giant. At the tree's roots, a pool of liquid light shimmered, its surface rippling as though alive. Kale hesitated, his hand hovering above the glowing pool. Something deep within him urged him to touch it, a pull he couldn't ignore. As his fingers brushed the surface, a jolt surged through him, and the world around him dissolved. Visions exploded in his mind, vivid and overwhelming. He saw the planet as it once was, a vibrant, thriving world, teeming with life. Towering guardians, beings of immense power and wisdom, walked among the people, their presence a shield against darkness. But then came the cataclysm, a great upheaval that shook the planet to its core. The guardians, unable to withstand the chaos, fell into a deep slumber, their essence buried within the very heart of the world. The visions shifted again, showing Kale what could happen if he awakened them too soon. Chaos, destruction, and a darkness that could consume everything. The weight of the visions crushed him, and Kale collapsed to the ground, his mind reeling. Hours passed before he stirred, the echoes of the images still vivid in his thoughts. But alongside the fear, a new resolve burned within him. He knew what he had to do. The guardians had to be awakened, but it had to be done carefully, with reverence and care. The fate of the planet depended on it. As he rose to his feet, the whispers he had heard earlier grew louder, more insistent. They swirled around him, carrying fragments of voices long forgotten. Shadows shifted at the edges of his vision, taking on fleeting shapes, tall, ethereal figures that seemed to watch him with ancient eyes. The guardian spirits were restless, their slumber uneasy. Kale could feel their presence, their yearning to be free, but he also felt the weight of the warning. Awakening them was not just a task, it was a responsibility, one that could shape the future of the planet for better or worse. The path ahead was uncertain, but Kale's determination burned brighter than ever. He would find a way to awaken the guardians, to restore balance to the planet. But he would do so with caution, guided by the wisdom of the visions. The whispers and shadows followed him as he turned to leave, a constant reminder of the delicate line he now walked. The journey was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. Kale took a deep breath, the chill of the cavern air biting at his skin as he stepped further into the labyrinth. The faint glow of the crystalline walls cast shifting patterns across the ground, illuminating his path in an eerie, otherworldly light. With every step, The whispers grew louder, more insistent, threading through his thoughts like a song he couldn't quite place. But there was something else now, shadows that seemed to move on their own, pooling and twisting into shapes that lingered just out of reach. Figures. Silent watchers. He paused, his heart quickening as one of the shadows shifted, resolving into a spectral form that hovered before him. It was a guardian, its presence both ethereal and palpable, as though it existed in two worlds at once. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, met his, and Kale felt a strange pull, as if the guardian was trying to speak without words. He reached out, his voice trembling as he asked, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" But the response was not what he expected. The guardian's movements were slow, deliberate, its hands forming shapes in the air that seemed to carry meaning just beyond his understanding. Fragments of thought brushed against his mind, images of a time long past, of a planet alive with light and sound, now silenced. Kale clenched his fists, frustration bubbling up as the guardian's message remained just out of reach. "I need to understand," he muttered, his voice echoing softly in the vast chamber. "Tell me how to help you." But the guardians offered no clear answers. Instead, they drifted back into the shadows, their forms dissolving into the darkness, as if retreating into a dream. Kale's jaw tightened. He couldn't stop now. There had to be something deeper, something at the heart of this place that held the key to their slumber. Ignoring the growing unease in his chest, he pressed forward, the whispers now a steady hum in his ears, almost like a warning. The ground beneath him shifted subtly, a faint tremor that sent a ripple through the air. Kale froze, his eyes darting to the walls of the cave. The crystals seemed to pulse faintly, their light dimming and brightening in time with the hum. It was as if the planet itself was responding to his presence, awakening in small, unsettling ways. He swallowed hard, the weight of what he was walking into settling on his shoulders. But there was no turning back. Somewhere ahead, in the depths of this ancient labyrinth, lay the answers he was searching for, and the guardian's freedom. The hum grew louder, more insistent, vibrating through the air and the ground alike. It was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, something vast and alive, stirring in the darkness. Kale's grip tightened on the satchel at his side, his resolve hardening. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it. The guardian's fate, and perhaps his own, depended on it. Kale stepped into the vast chamber, his breath catching in his throat as he took in the sight before him. Towering crystalline pillars rose like sentinels, their surfaces shimmering with a faint, rhythmic pulse of energy that cast an eerie glow across the room. Each pulse seemed to echo the heartbeat of the planet itself, a slow and steady thrum that reverberated through his very bones. At the center of it all stood a massive machine, its surface dull and lifeless, yet unmistakably ancient. This was no ordinary relic. It was a creation of the Guardians, a piece of technology so advanced it seemed almost otherworldly. Kale's heart raced as he realized its purpose. This machine was the key to awakening the Guardians, the only hope of restoring balance to the sleeping planet. But there was a problem. The machine was dormant, its mechanisms silent and unmoving. It needed power, a kind of energy Kale didn't possess. His mind raced as he scanned the chamber, desperation creeping in. The shadows outside were growing restless, their whispers louder, more insistent. Time was running out. Then, something caught his eye. Embedded in one of the crystalline pillars was a small, glowing orb, its light faint but steady. It seemed to hum with potential, as if it held the very essence of the planet's vitality. Kale hesitated only for a moment before reaching out and pulling it free. The moment the orb left the pillar, the chamber shuddered violently. Cracks spread across the walls, and chunks of crystal began to rain down from above. The air filled with the sound of splintering stone, and Kale knew he had to move fast. He clutched the orb tightly as he sprinted toward the exit, the ground trembling beneath his feet. Behind him, the shadows surged forward, their forms shifting from wispy tendrils to something far more solid, far more menacing. They were no longer just shadows, they were predators, and Kale was their prey. As he ran, the orb in his hand pulsed erratically, its light flickering like a dying flame. Kale's stomach twisted with doubt. What if the orb's energy wasn't enough? What if he had risked everything only to fail? The weight of his mission pressed down on him, but he pushed the fear aside. There was no turning back now. The Guardians had to be awakened, and he was the only one who could do it. The path ahead was uncertain, and the orb's instability only added to the danger. But Kale knew one thing for sure: he couldn't stop. Not while the fate of the sleeping planet hung in the balance. Kale stood before the ancient tree, its towering presence a silent witness to the ages. The orb pulsed faintly in his hands, its energy erratic and unstable. He stepped forward, his boots sinking into the soft earth, and placed the orb gently into the pool of liquid light at the base of the tree. The moment it touched the surface, the roots of the tree began to glow, brightening with a radiant, golden hue. Energy flowed from the roots into the orb, steadying its erratic pulses. The whispers that had haunted Kale since he first discovered the artifact grew louder, swirling around him like a storm of voices from another time. He could feel the power surging through him, a connection to something vast and ancient. But as the orb stabilized, the shadows around the tree began to shift. They thickened, their forms solidifying into ghostly figures, guardians of the past, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Their voices cut through the whispers, sharp and commanding. "Stop," they intoned, their words echoing with the weight of centuries. To awaken the Guardians is to disrupt the balance. The planet's harmony will shatter, and all will be lost. Kale hesitated, his hand hovering over the orb. The spirit's warning hung heavy in the air, their presence a reminder of the stakes at play. He glanced at the orb, now glowing steadily, and then back at the shadowy figures. His heart raced as he weighed their words against his own conviction. The planet was dying, its life force fading with each passing day. If he didn't act now, there might not be another chance. With a deep breath, Kale made his choice. He reached out, his fingers brushing the orb's surface, and activated its power. The moment he did, the ground beneath him trembled violently, as if the planet itself were protesting. The air filled with a deafening roar, a sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth. The guardian spirits howled in fury, their forms dissipating into the shadows as the ancient tree's glow intensified. Kale braced himself, his resolve unshaken, as the first stirrings of the Guardian's awakening began to ripple across the sleeping planet. The ground trembled violently as the Guardian stirred, their colossal forms emerging from the earth like mountains, awakened from a timeless sleep. Kale stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat, as their massive limbs stretched skyward, their eyes igniting with a luminous, ancient glow. The air crackled with energy, thick and electric, as if the planet itself was reacting to their return. But this was no calm awakening. It was chaos. The surge of power radiating from the Guardians sent shockwaves across the land, whipping the skies into raging storms and splitting the ground with jagged fissures. Kale's heart raced as he realized the truth. The planet's energy, long kept in balance by their slumber, was now spiraling out of control. As the Guardians turned their gaze toward him, their voices resonated in his mind, deep and resonant, like the rumble of distant thunder. "Who dares disturb our rest?" they demanded, their words echoing with an authority that made Kale's knees weaken. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to stand tall. "I am Kale," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging around him. "I came to awaken you, to save this world from the darkness that threatens it." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the howling winds. Then, the Guardians began to speak among themselves, their voices overlapping like the clash of tides. Some saw Kale as a savior, a beacon of hope who had freed them from their long imprisonment. Others viewed him with suspicion, their glowing eyes narrowing as they accused him of unleashing destruction upon the planet. The tension between them was palpable, a rift forming as deep as the chasms tearing through the ground beneath their feet. Kale knew time was running out. The planet's energy was growing more unstable with every passing second, threatening to consume everything in its path. He had to act, and quickly. "Listen to me," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We must work together, or this world will be lost. I didn't wake you to watch it fall apart." His words hung in the air, met with a mix of murmurs and silence. The Guardians exchanged glances, their ancient minds weighing his plea. Kale could feel the weight of their doubt, their hesitation, but he also sensed a glimmer of hope. If he could just find the right words, the right proof, he might be able to unite them. But with the storms growing fiercer and the ground shaking beneath him, Kale knew the clock was ticking, and the fate of the planet hung in the balance. Kale stood before the Guardians, their shimmering forms glowing faintly in the dim light of the cavern. He spoke with a quiet urgency, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "If we combine our strengths, we can restore the planet's energy. Together, we can bring stability back to this world." The Guardians exchanged glances, their ancient eyes reflecting centuries of wisdom and weariness. After a moment of silence, they nodded in unison, agreeing to join forces with the unlikely stranger who had awakened them. Guided by the Guardians, Kale ventured deeper into the heart of the planet. The air grew warmer, humming with a faint, rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo through the walls. At the center of it all lay the ancient machine, a colossal structure of stone and metal, dormant for untold ages. Its surface was etched with intricate patterns, glowing faintly as if waiting for the touch of life. Kale approached cautiously, his hands trembling slightly as he reached out to activate the machine. The moment his fingers brushed the controls, the cavern came alive with a surge of energy, a brilliant light erupting from the machine and spreading outward in waves. The guardians surrounded Kale, their forms glowing brighter as they channeled their power into the machine. The light grew more intense, flooding the cavern and spilling out into the world above. The howling storms that had ravaged the planet began to subside, the winds calming and the skies clearing. The ground, once shaking violently, grew still. For a moment, it seemed as though the planet itself was breathing a sigh of relief, but the effort came at a cost. The Guardians' light dimmed, their forms flickering weakly as they withdrew their energy. They turned to Kale, their voices echoing with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "We have done what we could," one of the Guardians said, its voice soft but heavy with meaning. "Our slumber was not a choice, but a necessity. It allowed us to preserve the planet's energy, to keep it safe from those who might misuse it. You have awakened us, and in doing so, you have disrupted the balance." The Guardian paused, its gaze piercing yet kind. "Now you must decide. You may leave this world, and we will return to our slumber, restoring the balance as it was. Or you may stay and help us rebuild. The choice is yours." Kale felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. His mission had been clear: to find the source of the planet's instability and restore it. But standing here, surrounded by the Guardians and feeling the pulse of the planet beneath his feet, he realized there was more at stake than he had imagined. The bond he had formed with this world, with its people and its Guardians, pulled at him in ways he hadn't expected. He glanced at the Guardians, their weakened forms a reminder of the sacrifice they had made. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: whatever he chose, the future of this planet, and perhaps his own, would be forever changed. Kale made his choice, and it was one that would change the course of his life forever. Instead of returning to the world he once knew, he chose to stay on the sleeping planet, dedicating himself to the Guardians and their sacred mission. Day by day, he immersed himself in their ancient practices, learning to read the subtle rhythms of the planet's energy. It was a delicate dance, a symbiosis that had existed for eons between the land, the creatures, and the unseen forces that flowed through everything. The more he learned, the more he began to see the sleeping planet not just as a place, but as something far greater, a living, breathing entity, pulsing with life and connected to the very fabric of the galaxy itself. The Guardians, wise and patient, guided him through their rituals and teachings. They showed him how to listen to the planet's whispers, how to feel its heartbeat in the rustle of leaves and the rush of rivers. For Kale, it was like learning a new language, one that transcended words and spoke directly to his soul. With each passing day, he felt a deeper connection forming, a bond that filled him with an overwhelming sense of peace. It was as if the planet had chosen him, just as he had chosen it, but this peace came with a price. The Guardians warned him that the balance they had worked so hard to restore was fragile, like a thread stretched taut over an abyss. One misstep, one careless act, could unravel everything. Kale felt the weight of this truth settle on his shoulders, a responsibility heavier than anything he had ever known. He had seen the consequences of imbalance firsthand: the storms, the withering of life, the chaos that threatened to consume the planet. And so, he vowed to protect it, to stand as a guardian himself, even as the enormity of his task loomed larger with each passing moment. Yet, within that responsibility, there was also a profound sense of purpose. Kale had found something he had never known. He was searching for a home, a calling, and a connection to something greater than himself. The sleeping planet had given him a gift, and in return, he would give it everything he had. But as he stood beneath its shimmering skies, he couldn't shake the quiet question that lingered in the back of his mind. How long could such a fragile balance truly last? As Kale ventured deeper into the heart of the planet, the air grew cooler, and the faint hum of ancient machinery echoed through the cavernous walls. The path, illuminated by a soft, ethereal glow, led him to a massive door carved with intricate symbols that seemed to pulse with life. With a gentle push, the door creaked open, revealing a chamber untouched by time. Inside, towering shelves of ancient texts lined the walls, their pages filled with script that glimmered faintly, as if alive. Strange artifacts rested on pedestals, each radiating a quiet, otherworldly energy. Kale's breath caught as he approached the center of the room, where a large holographic projection flickered to life. It showed a civilization of immense power, their cities gleaming under twin suns. But as the projection unfolded, it revealed their downfall, a cataclysmic event that forced them to make an unimaginable choice. To protect their world from a force that consumed entire stars, they sacrificed their physical forms, transforming into the guardians Kale now knew. They became bound to the planet, their essence woven into its very fabric, ensuring its survival through their eternal slumber. Yet the text spoke of a warning. The threat that had driven them to this fate was not gone, only delayed. A shadow still lingered in the darkest corners of the galaxy, biding its time, waiting for the moment to return. The Guardian's awakening, triggered by Kale's arrival, may have already drawn its attention. As he absorbed this revelation, a chill ran through him. His mission, once thought complete, was only the beginning. The fragile peace he had helped restore now hung by a thread. Kale hurried back to the surface, his mind racing with the weight of what he had uncovered. He found the Guardians waiting, their luminous forms pulsing with a quiet intensity. Without hesitation, he shared his discovery, the words spilling out as he recounted the ancient texts and the looming danger they foretold. The Guardians, though silent, seemed to understand. Their light dimmed, as if in solemn acknowledgement, before growing brighter with resolve. Together, they would prepare for what lay ahead, knowing that the battle they thought they had escaped centuries ago was now inevitable. The planet's awakening had set something in motion, and the Guardians, and Kale, would stand ready to face it. Kale stood at the heart of the planet, his hands glowing faintly with the energy he had begun to master. Around him, the Guardians moved with purpose, their ancient wisdom guiding every action as they worked to fortify the sleeping planet. Together, they awakened long-dormant machines buried deep within the planet's core, their gears groaning and sparks flying as they roared back to life. These mechanical sentinels, once silent and forgotten, now stood as the first line of defense against the looming threat. Above them, barriers of shimmering light began to form, stretching across the horizon like a protective veil. Each pulse of light was a testament to their combined strength, a shield woven from the planet's own essence. As the days passed, Kale trained tirelessly alongside the Guardians, learning to channel the planet's energy in ways he had never imagined. The power flowed through him like a river, vast and unyielding, but with each surge, he could feel the strain growing. His body ached, and his mind felt heavy, as though the whispers of the planet's energy were pressing against his thoughts, threatening to drown him in their endless chorus. The Guardians watched him closely, their voices calm but insistent. "Be cautious, Kale," they warned. "The energy you wield is not without cost. Push too hard, and it may consume you." But Kale was unrelenting. The weight of his mission pressed upon him, driving him to push past his limits. He could not, would not, fail the planet that had become his home. With each passing moment, he grew stronger, his connection to the planet deepening, but so too did the whispers grow louder. They were no longer mere murmurs, but a cacophony of voices, echoing with warnings and secrets he could not yet decipher. And then there were the disturbances, subtle at first, like ripples on the surface of a still lake, but growing more pronounced. The planet's energy, once steady and harmonious, now flickered with an unsettling irregularity. Kale could feel it, a presence, something ancient and malevolent, stirring in the shadows beyond the stars. The Guardians felt it too, their expressions solemn as they exchanged knowing glances. The enemy was drawing near, and the time to prepare was running out. The sky darkened as the ancient enemy descended, their colossal fleet casting a shadow so vast it seemed to swallow the stars themselves. Chips of blackened metal and jagged edges filled the horizon, their weapons glowing with a malevolent light as they unleashed destruction upon the planet. Beams of energy tore through the luminous barriers that had protected the sleeping planet for eons, shattering the once impenetrable defenses. Kale stood at the forefront, his heart pounding as he rallied the Guardians, their forms glowing with the planet's radiant energy. Together, they fought back, weaving shields of light and hurling blasts of pure energy at the invaders. But for every ship they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The enemy's technology was unlike anything they had ever faced, relentless, efficient, and terrifyingly advanced. As the battle raged, Kale began to see the grim reality of their situation. The Guardians were powerful, but even their combined strength was no match for the sheer numbers of the enemy fleet. They were being pushed to their limits, their energy reserves dwindling with each passing moment. It became clear that they couldn't win this war of attrition. If they were to have any hope of saving the planet, they needed to strike at the heart of the enemy's fleet, a massive command vessel that loomed in the distance like a dark citadel. But reaching it would require a sacrifice, one that even Kale hesitated to make. The Guardians, sensing his uncertainty, gathered around him. Their voices echoed in his mind, calm and resolute. They offered to channel all of their remaining energy into a single, devastating attack. A burst of light so powerful, it could pierce through the enemy's defenses and cripple their fleet. But the cost would be immense. Such an act would leave the Guardians weakened, their connection to the planet frayed. They would be vulnerable, unable to defend themselves or the sleeping planet if the enemy retaliated. Kale clenched his fists, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He knew what had to be done, but the thought of risking everything, his companions, the planet, the very future they were fighting for, filled him with dread. The air crackled with tension as the Guardians began to gather their energy, their forms flickering like dying stars. Kale looked out at the battlefield, at the destruction wrought by the enemy, and then back at the Guardians, their unwavering determination shining through. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was their only chance, their only hope. With a nod, he gave the signal. The guardians surged forward, their combined energy coalescing into a blinding spear of light that shot across the void, aimed straight at the heart of the enemy's fleet. The attack struck true, tearing through the command vessel and sending shock waves rippling through the fleet. But as the light faded, Kale could only watch in silence, knowing that the true test of their courage was yet to come. Kale stood at the center of the ancient chamber, the weight of the Guardian's plea pressing heavily on his shoulders. He nodded, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions within him. "I'll do it," he said, and with those words, the Guardians began to gather their power, their forms glowing brighter as they channeled the planet's energy into a single, radiant beam. The air hummed with intensity, and Kale reached out, guiding the light with a focus that seemed to pierce the very fabric of space. The beam surged forward, a lance of pure energy, cutting through the darkness, aimed unerringly at the heart of the enemy's fleet. The impact was catastrophic. A blinding flash erupted as the command ship disintegrated, its destruction sending shockwaves through the fleet. Enemy vessels scattered, their formations crumbling into chaos. For a moment, it seemed as though victory was within reach, but as the light faded, so too did the strength of the Guardians. Their glow dimmed, their forms flickering like dying embers, and the planet itself seemed to shudder under the strain. Kale felt it too, a deep, unrelenting exhaustion that seeped into his bones. His body trembled, every muscle screaming in protest, and his vision blurred as the whispers in his mind grew louder, more insistent. They clawed at the edges of his thoughts, a cacophony of voices he couldn't silence. The enemy had retreated, but the cost was staggering. The planet's energy reserves were nearly depleted, and the Guardians, once mighty and unyielding, now stood weakened, their power stretched to its limits. Kale clenched his fists, resolve hardening within him. This was only the beginning. The enemy would return, stronger and more determined than before, and the planet's defenses were no longer what they once were. He couldn't afford to falter. "We need to rebuild," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of the dying light. "We need to find a way to restore the planet's energy, to prepare for what's coming." The whispers in his mind shifted, their tone shifting from chaotic to almost guiding. Kale shook his head, trying to clear the noise, but the sensation lingered. Something within him was changing, and he wasn't sure if it was a sign of hope or a harbinger of something far darker. For now, all he could do was move forward, one step at a time, toward whatever lay ahead. Kale descended deeper into the heart of the planet, the air growing heavier with each step. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, but a faint, golden glow began to pulse in the distance, calling him forward. As he pressed on, the whispers that had haunted him since his arrival grew louder, more insistent. They twisted into voices he recognized, his own doubts, fears, and regrets. Shadows began to take shape around him, morphing into figures that mirrored his inner turmoil. They sneered and jeered, their words cutting deep, trying to convince him he wasn't strong enough, that he didn't belong here. But Kale remembered the teachings of the Guardians, their wisdom echoing in his mind like a steady drumbeat. He closed his eyes, centering himself, and felt the planet's presence wrap around him like a warm embrace. The bond he had forged with it was stronger than the illusions before him. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, his resolve unshaken. The shadows recoiled, their forms dissolving into mist as he moved closer to the source of the light. At last, he reached the hidden reservoir, a vast, glowing pool of pure energy, its light so intense it seemed to breathe. Kale felt a surge of awe and humility as he approached it. This was the lifeblood of the planet, a force of creation and renewal. He stretched out his hand, and the energy responded, flowing into him in a brilliant cascade. It was overwhelming, yet familiar, as if it had always been a part of him. He channeled it outward, sending it surging through the planet's veins, reigniting its strength and vitality. But the experience was not without cost. As the energy coursed through him, Kale felt a shift within himself. His mind, once filled with the noise of doubts, now resonated with the planet's whispers, soft and steady like the hum of a distant star. His body, too, bore the mark of the encounter, a faint, ethereal glow that lingered on his skin. He was no longer just a traveler or a protector. He had become something more, a bridge between the planet and its future. When he finally emerged from the core, the surface greeted him with a renewed vibrancy. The air felt lighter, the colors brighter, and the guardians awaited him with quiet reverence. Kale stood tall, his gaze steady, ready to face the challenges ahead. The planet's whispers were now a part of him, a reminder of the bond they shared and the responsibility he carried. Whatever came next, he knew he would face it not just with strength, but with the light of the planet itself guiding his way. The Guardians, their strength now fully restored, moved with purpose across the sleeping planet. Towering spires of light began to rise once more, their glow casting long shadows over the fractured land. Kale stood among them, his hands glowing faintly as he channeled the planet's energy, weaving it into barriers of shimmering light. It was a strange sensation, feeling the pulse of the world beneath his fingertips, as if the planet itself was alive and trusting him to protect it. The Guardians watched in silence, their ancient eyes filled with respect. They had never seen an outsider wield the planet's energy with such precision, and yet, Kale was no longer entirely an outsider. He was becoming something else, something they could not yet fully understand. As the days passed, Kale found himself drawn deeper into their world. He shared stories of the galaxy he had once called home, tales of sprawling star systems, thriving civilizations, and the ever-present shadow of conflict. The Guardians listened intently, their curiosity piqued by his accounts of life beyond their secluded world. In return, they revealed secrets of their own, teaching him the ancient rituals and philosophies that had guided them for millennia. Kale learned of the planet's sacred role as a beacon of balance, a silent guardian of cosmic harmony. It was a heavy responsibility, one he hadn't fully grasped until now. Yet, even as he grew closer to the Guardians, Kale couldn't shake the feeling of being caught between two worlds. His connection to the planet was a gift, but it also set him apart. The Guardians, for all their wisdom, were bound to this world in ways he could never fully emulate, and the life he had left behind, his ship, his crew, the familiar hum of stardust beneath his feet, felt like a distant memory. He often found himself gazing at the stars, wondering if he would ever return to them. The planet's energy flowed through him, but it also anchored him, tethering him to a destiny he hadn't chosen. The isolation grew heavier with each passing day. The Guardians, though kind, could not fully understand his struggle. To them, he was a bridge between worlds, a symbol of hope. But to Kale, the weight of that role felt overwhelming. He was torn between the duty he had embraced and the life he still longed for. The planet's energy whispered to him, urging him to stay, to protect, to fulfill his purpose. Yet his heart ached for the freedom of the stars, for the camaraderie of those who had once called him captain. It was a conflict without an easy resolution, a quiet battle that played out in his thoughts as he worked to rebuild the planet's defenses, one shimmering barrier at a time. As Kale stood atop the ancient tower, the winds of the sleeping planet whispered secrets only the Guardians could fully understand. But his thoughts were interrupted by a faint, familiar hum, a sound he hadn't heard in years. It was the signal of his old ship, the Starlight Echo, now repaired and soaring through the void. The transmission crackled to life, and a voice he hadn't expected to hear again filled the air. It was Jara, his former co-pilot and friend, her tone urgent and laced with warning. "Kale," she said, "something's coming. A warlord named Drakthar has set his sights on this planet. He's not just after conquest, he wants to drain its energy, to turn its power into a weapon. If he succeeds, the sleeping planet won't just wake, it will burn." The weight of her words settled over Kale like a storm cloud. Drakthar was no ordinary threat. His name was whispered in fear across the galaxy, a tyrant who left ruin in his wake. Kale's mind raced. The sleeping planet's energy was vast, ancient, and largely untapped, a prize that could tip the balance of power in the universe. But it was also fragile, tied to the delicate harmony the Guardians had preserved for millennia. The Guardians, sensing his turmoil, gathered around him. Their voices, calm yet firm, urged him to stay. "The outsiders bring chaos," they said. "Their presence alone could unravel the threads that hold this world together. The sleeping planet must remain hidden, its secrets safe." Kale clenched his fists, torn between duty and desperation. He had always been a man of action, a protector by nature. The thought of standing by while Drakthar carved a path of destruction was unbearable. Yet the Guardian's warnings echoed in his mind. Could he risk exposing the planet to the galaxy, to civilizations that might exploit its power, just as Drakthar intended? He gazed at the horizon, where the twin suns dipped low, casting the sky in hues of amber and violet. The sleeping planet had given him a second chance, a purpose he had thought lost forever. But now, that purpose was tested. To act alone would be to face overwhelming odds. To seek help would be to gamble with the planet's very essence. As the stars began to pierce the darkening sky, Kale felt the weight of the choice before him. It wasn't just about strategy or strength. It was about trust. Could he trust the galaxy to see the sleeping planet as more than a resource? Could he trust himself to make the right call, knowing the stakes? The Guardians watched him in silence, their ancient eyes filled with both hope and fear. Kale knew his decision would ripple far beyond this moment, shaping the fate of worlds. And as the winds carried the faint hum of the Starlight Echo into the distance, he took a deep breath, ready to step into the unknown once more. Kale knew that the fate of the sleeping planet, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested on his ability to unite those who had long been divided. With the Guardian's teachings etched into his mind, and the planet's ancient energy flowing through him, he set out on a journey that would take him to the farthest reaches of the stars. His first stop was the bustling trade hub of Zephyria, a world known for its diversity and its leaders' pragmatism. There, he stood before the Council of Seven, their faces a mix of curiosity and doubt as he spoke of the sleeping planet's power and the looming threat of the Warlord. Some dismissed his words as the ramblings of a dreamer, but others leaned in, their eyes alight with the possibility of a galaxy no longer torn by conflict. From Zephyria, Kale traveled to the crystalline cities of Lumara, where the air shimmered with light and the people valued wisdom above all else. The Lumaran elders listened intently as he shared the Guardian's message of balance and unity. They saw in him not just a messenger, but a leader, one who carried the weight of a sacred duty. Their support was cautious but genuine, and Kale felt a flicker of hope. Yet, even as alliances began to form, he couldn't ignore the whispers of the Warlord's growing strength. Scouts reported sightings of his fleet, amassing near the edge of known space, their ships bristling with weapons. The journey was not without its challenges. On the war-torn plains of Krylos, Kale faced outright hostility. The Krylosian warlords, hardened by generations of conflict, scoffed at his vision of peace. Strength is the only language the galaxy understands. Their commander sneered, his voice thick with disdain. Kale left Krylos with a heavy heart, knowing that not all would heed his call. But even in the face of rejection, he refused to falter. Every alliance, no matter how small, was a step toward a brighter future. As the days turned into weeks, Kale felt the weight of time pressing down on him. The Warlord's forces were advancing, and the fragile coalition he had built was still far from ready. With each new world he visited, the urgency grew. He knew he couldn't protect the sleeping planet alone, but he also knew that unity couldn't be forced. It had to be earned. Finally, with a mixture of hope and apprehension, Kale returned to the sleeping planet. The air was calm, the ancient forests whispering softly as if in greeting. He stood at the edge of the great chasm, where the planet's energy pulsed like a heartbeat, and wondered if the alliances he had forged would be enough. The Warlord's shadow loomed ever closer, and Kale could feel the tension tightening like a coiled spring. He had done all he could now. The galaxy's fate rested in the hands of those who had chosen to stand with him. The sky above the sleeping planet darkened as the Warlord's fleet descended, their ships like shadows blotting out the stars. The ground trembled under the weight of their assault, and Kale stood ready, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. Beside him, the Guardians and their newfound allies prepared for the fight of their lives. The air crackled with energy as the planet itself seemed to awaken, its ancient power surging through the defenders. The battle began with a deafening roar as the Warlord's forces unleashed their fury. Lasers streaked across the sky, and explosions tore through the landscape, but Kale and the Guardians held their ground. Together, they channeled the planet's energy, creating a shield of light that repelled the invaders' attacks. The Guardians moved as one, their movements fueled by the very life force of the planet they fought to protect. Yet, despite their strength, the enemy's numbers seemed endless, and the strain on the planet's defenses grew with each passing moment. Kale knew they couldn't hold out forever. With a fierce determination, he rallied his allies and led a daring charge toward the Warlord's flagship. The massive vessel loomed above them, its weapons raining destruction below. Kale's connection to the planet's energy pulsed within him, guiding his every step. He focused his power, directing it toward the flagship's core. With a blinding flash, the ship's weapons fell silent, its systems disabled by the sheer force of Kale's will. The Warlord, once so confident in his victory, now faced the wrath of those he had sought to conquer. As the flagship crumbled, the tide of battle turned. The Warlord's forces, now leaderless, began to retreat. The defenders of the sleeping planet had won, but the cost was devastating. The planet's energy, once a boundless source of life, was now nearly exhausted. The battlefield was littered with the fallen, their sacrifices a stark reminder of the price of victory. Kale knelt beside the bodies of his allies, his heart heavy with grief. These were not just warriors, they were friends, brothers, and sisters in arms who had given everything to protect their home. In the quiet that followed the battle, Kale felt the weight of their loss settle over him. But amidst the sorrow, there was also hope. The sleeping planet still lived, its heartbeat faint but steady. Kale knew that their sacrifice had not been in vain. He rose to his feet, his resolve stronger than ever. With the guardians at his side, he vowed to honor the memory of those who had fallen by continuing to defend their home. The road ahead would be long, and the challenges great, but Kale was ready. The sleeping planet had endured, and so too would its protectors. Kale stood on the surface of the sleeping planet, his boots pressing into the soft, glowing soil as the guardians moved around him. Their forms shimmered faintly, like echoes of the ancient energy that had once slumbered beneath the surface. The air was alive with a quiet hum, a melody of renewal and hope. The whispers that had once filled his mind, urging, guiding, sometimes haunting, had fallen silent. In their place, there was only stillness, a deep and unshakable calm. He had come to this world seeking answers, but he was leaving with something far greater, a sense of belonging, a purpose that stretched beyond himself. The guardians worked tirelessly, their movements fluid and deliberate as they rebuilt what had been lost. Kale watched them, marveling at their resilience. These beings, born of starlight and time, had endured eons of waiting, only to rise when the galaxy needed them most. And now, they stood as protectors once more, their presence a reminder that even in the darkest moments, balance could be restored. Kale felt a swell of pride, knowing he had played a role in awakening them. The planet itself seemed to breathe beneath him, its light pulsing gently, a heartbeat in rhythm with his own. He crouched, pressing his hand to the ground, and felt the warmth of its energy flow through him. It was a connection unlike anything he had ever known, a bond not just to this world, but to the vast, intricate web of life that spanned the stars. The sleeping planet had awakened, and with it, something in Kale had awakened too. He rose to his feet, gazing out at the horizon where the twin suns dipped low, casting the sky in hues of gold and violet. The galaxy was vast, filled with both wonder and danger, but Kale no longer felt adrift. He had found a home here, among the guardians and their timeless mission. Challenges would come, of that he had no doubt, but he was ready. The whispers had quieted, but their lessons remained, etched into his very being. As the light of the planet continued to pulse beneath him, Kale felt a quiet resolve settle in his chest. The galaxy was a tapestry of countless stories, each thread woven into the next. His story was now a part of that tapestry, intertwined with the guardians, the sleeping planet, and the countless lives he had touched. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was one he would face with courage and hope. The sleeping planet slept no more, and neither did he. Together, they would stand as a beacon of balance, a reminder that even in the face of chaos, harmony could be found.